The honeymoon period with Battlefield 6 has started to wear off. Now, granted, Battlefield 6's release has been fantastic. It is a game that has allowed FPS players to come back into a sandbox environment, have fun with their friends again, not worry about things like skill-based matchmaking, not worry about cheaters in their lobbies, and just enjoy themselves in an interesting and fun sandbox environment. But it hasn't been perfect, and around about a year ago, I was invited to give feedback on Battlefield 6. And some of the issues and things that I had raised during those conversations with EA and the various people and developers who are working on the game are still holding true in the release of the game. The good news is that a lot of this sentiment has now formally been acknowledged in a very extensive blog post that we're going to be talking about in this video. The bad news is that not all of it is immediately fixable. There's a lot to dive into and unpack here, so let's get on into it. And by the way, if you are new here, drop a like and consider subscribing. We're on the road to 200k. So the first thing to get out of the way is that there was in fact an update on November 11th that started to address some of the issues with Bloom in the game, but weirdly in a very undefined way just made Battlefield 6 and RedSec substantially more responsive. Now, because we are in the early days of the life cycle of this game, it's very frequent and very common that lots of fixes just get bundled into an update, and some of them don't actually make it into the blog post. But when I fired up Battlefield 6 and I fired up RedSec on November 11th, not only was I pleased to find that some of the spread and bloom reset bugs definitely had been fixed, I was also surprised to see that hit reg also felt substantially better, and general responsiveness felt substantially better. Now, granted, I am in a very ideal setup, playing over Ethernet with a very local server at very low latency, so depending on your situation, your experience may vary, but for the most part, Battlefield 6 got a really good QoL patch on November 11th that just made the game feel better and dealt with some of the underlying bugs like the MR missile situation, and also dealing with things like the drones being able to be hammered onto and people getting on top of rooftops. But the biggest issues with Battlefield 6 are more overarching than that. And a lot of these were issues that I had given feedback on to developers before the release of this game, and honestly, not a huge amount of it had been addressed by the release of the game. Some of it definitely had been tackled to some extent, and I feel like these are really big structural problems that need to change for Battlefield 6 to be long-term successful. Don't get me wrong, the game's in a pretty decent state now, and we're definitely not talking about some of the horror launches that we've seen in the past like Battlefield 4. The bones are solid, the networking is solid, and whilst there are some bugs in some places, it is certainly nowhere near that level of screwed up that we have seen historically. But there are some big structural foundational issues that I feel need to change. The first one is the general sandbox feel of Battlefield has definitely been lost in some places. Now, the new map releasing on November 18th, in my opinion, which is Eastwood, is actually just phenomenal, and I actually think it's a blueprint for what Battlefield 6 maps should look like, and really injects some of that fun factor back into the maps with a decently large play space that just allows you to utilize some really fun moments with golf carts, good infantry breakup gameplay, good vehicle gameplay, and kind of just understands better what it is to be a Battlefield map. But even Eastwood isn't perfect, and in an ideal future, we need to see much more expansive maps with larger player spaces that actually focus on vehicles for once. And this leads me to my next 2 points. Vehicle gameplay in Battlefield 6 is diabolically bad, and it wasn't planned or pre-scheduled, but it seems every Battlefield content creator has recognized this and started addressing this publicly and face-on. Vehicles just aren't in a healthy spot in this game. They're completely unbalanced in the sense that most of them can be instantly deleted by 90% of what's available in the game. And other than a handful of really situational instances, tanks suck, IFVs for the most part kind of suck, although seemingly somehow hold up better than the other vehicles. Helicopters are pretty bad, jets are pretty bad. Nothing feels like it's in a very healthy place with vehicles in Battlefield 6. And part of that is down to the fact that these vehicles have been designed to be glass cannons, and the other part of that is just that the map design for this game is so heavily infantry focused and catered that they've completely forgotten how vehicles are supposed to work in this title. Now, the big issue for me is that it's all well and good having glass cannon vehicles if those glass cannon vehicles actually have utilizable map surrounding spaces to break in and out of engagements, and that simply isn't the case. And in fact, on some maps, some vehicles just don't even make any sense at all. The recent edition of Blackwell Fields allowed you to fly jets, you take off, you take a left turn, and you're instantly over the other team's landing strip. It just felt like it had been bolted onto the map for showcasing or set piecing, but never simply made any sense to be there in the first place. And in fact, the only map that remotely works, I believe, for combined arms is Firestorm, and even then, in some instances, there's a pretty distinct lack of visual breaking cover for vehicles to get in and out of engagement situations, and it just happens to be that that map is nowhere from this generation. The only map that weirdly works for helicopters and jets in all senses of the word for the most part is Liberation Peak, which doesn't have the size and scale of a play space to really be considered a good jet or helicopter map. It just happens to feature a large number of actual physical landmarks to break visual locks and break lock-ons, generally speaking. So the glass cannon approach on that map can actually work, but for the most part, it's pretty diabolically bad, and only really shines on the one historical remaster that we've seen in this title. And this leads me perfectly onto my third point, which is why vehicles have been left behind and why Battlefield, I think, is really suffering from feeling very samey on a lot of the maps, feeling very uninspired on a lot of the maps, and really struggling to create a combined arms sandbox that the franchise is actually known for. And this is time to engagement. Now, I spoke about this extensively, like repeatedly, in multiple bits of feedback towards the developers for Battlefield 6, because time to engagement is something that I feel is a really big problem in Battlefield 6, and it's something that the developers are clearly chasing that I feel is at the detriment to the actual gameplay experience itself. And what I mean by that is that the developers clearly have a very specific time in mind that they want people to get into a gunfight in, say, 4 or 5 seconds. From the moment you spawn to you fighting an opponent, they have a fixed time window that they are clearly designing these maps around in order to keep people hyper-engaged in the action and not running around doing nothing. Now granted, that's not necessarily a bad thing and can be executed quite well, but seemingly the time to engagement across every single map is identical, because that would be the only way to explain not only the really confined spaces and smaller maps across the board. I genuinely, in my opinion, believe the only large map in this game is Operation Firestorm that actually works. Mirak Valley, for me, doesn't really cut it. And then on top of that, you also have to bear in mind that they're still condensing the actual player spaces by moving HQs together to further reduce distances, further reduce time to engagement, and create the same kind of chaotic experience across all spaces. And whilst that can genuinely improve player engagement and make people feel a little bit more locked in, a little bit more, hyped up for what's happening in game, the harsh reality of all of that is that it makes all of the player experiences feel the same. Siege of Cairo is fundamentally different from other maps in the game like Manhattan Bridge, but if you actually play both of those maps, the time to engagements are pretty much identical, and either way, by the end of it, if you don't happen to fall upon something like a firestorm in between the two, you start to feel very burnt out, because you're just constantly in this perpetual state of fighting people, as opposed to getting any downtime whatsoever. And whilst you don't want to be running for 20 minutes without any gunfights, Battlefield is known for having some downtime in between, a little bit of mobility, a little bit of using vehicles to get from point A to point B, and that doesn't exist in Battlefield 6. So chasing a very specific time to engagement has led to smaller player spaces, which has led to shoddy map design for vehicles, which has collapsed the sandbox experience and simultaneously, in my opinion, completely reduced any kind of multi-armed gameplay that we're used to seeing in Battlefield franchises from before. And whilst that sounds very doom and gloom, it isn't necessarily. Battlefield 6 is a fantastic infantry variant of some Battlefield games, and in some places it can work, and with some vehicle passes and general balancing, it definitely will be better. It just needs to structurally change from the top down in terms of design ethos to make things better for the long-term life cycle of this game. But you might be wondering, well, with all of this said and done, what are Battlefield actually doing about this? Well, as of the making of this video, Battlefield actually has released a community update acknowledging a lot of the things going on in the game. They mentioned that in the upcoming update on November 18th, not only are they going to be dealing with more bloom situations and changing and tuning weapons to feel less like bloom is impactful, they're also fixing things like the crazy blinding light whenever you go in and out of a building that definitely has been impacting player experiences. But further to this entire blog post just to me felt like a really good core understanding of actually what people who are playing this game are talking about, and also a really good understanding of some of the issues that people currently see in Battlefield 6 and expect to be improved upon or fixed in the near future. So like I mentioned, we have the Bloom Pass, which is coming up again in another update in November 18th, a Lighting Pass again on November 18th, but vehicles are also getting their first balancing pass on December 8th, as is fixes to Rush and Breakthrough, which is really exciting to see, and it feels as though this is the first stab at rectifying some of these issues that I've mentioned with vehicles before, and perhaps dealing with just generally the fact that linear gameplay in this Battlefield doesn't seem to be particularly great. Like, I genuinely haven't enjoyed Rush or Breakthrough at all, and mostly have been playing Conquest and Escalation. There are other fixes coming to the game as well, like fixes for the PlayStation controller dead zones on PC, which, if you're completely unaware of this issue, at the moment they are square dead zones, which is a legacy bug, and will be fixed to round dead zones specifically for the PC client, and also aim assist being reverted back to the beta values, which is very exciting. The blog post then goes on to talk about some areas within the Battlefield space that they are acknowledging and making us aware that they're aware of it. Now, there isn't any firm commitments in any of this. Most of the language in this community post is essentially, look, we see this, we hear this conversation, and it's something that we are thinking about, which honestly is better than nothing. Like, there's no point Battlefield committing to, yes, we're going to make 75,000 large maps, and they aren't to people's expectations. But saying that in this blog post, which they do, that they acknowledge that map size has been a discussion within the community, and the design of maps in order for things like vehicles to work is a very refreshing take on things. And having this level of communication where the developers are actually looking at core tenets of this game and core modules of this game and saying, well, hey, look, maybe map design could be a little bit better, is really promising. And they have said that they are looking into the size of maps, they are looking into general map design, and it's something that hopefully in the future with things like Season 2, 3, and beyond, we will see more variety entering the game. And I think Eastwood will probably be the first step towards that. In this post, they also acknowledge that the UI and menu system is really just not great. Now, granted, I do always appreciate the fact that Battlefield and DICE in particular try to include as many options as humanly possible in the game so that you can customize things exactly how you want them and change things to be exactly how you want them to be. That's great, that's fantastic, but when all of the actual settings that you want to get to are spread out across pretty much everything, it gets a little confusing and it gets a little frustrating. And not even just having like a basic search functionality so I can find a specific keybind or find a specific setting is, to me, really problematic. And acknowledging that this is an issue is good to see. In this blog post, they've also acknowledged that challenges and how they approach challenges, ethos-wise, probably needs to change so that people aren't relying on things like bot farms to try and deal with some of the challenges which are just inherently frustrating at times. And also that they're looking into things like stat tracking, leaderboards, that kind of thing to be accessible in-game. Now, all of this stuff is available on an open API, which is fantastic, but historically, Battlefield has had pretty good in-game tracking, and seeing those elements come to the game is equally as important. And the final one, and the big one in my opinion, is hit reg. Now, I do feel as though hit reg is kind of a double-edged sword in the community at the moment because, well, triple edge is probably a better explainer for this. On the one hand, there are some people who clearly don't understand how Bloom works, full autos their weapon while strafing, and then complains that their bullets have no hit reg or that they aren't hitting the target. And I have seen this happen in real time, where even streamers and content creators who aren't familiar with Battlefield are struggling to be accurate and then blame it on bad hit reg. Now, the other flip side of that is that there is just generally some hit reg issues in Battlefield 6. I don't think there are a massive amount of them, but there are some instances where after a certain animation or a certain thing is triggered or a certain bug seems to activate, you do just get no hit reg, and that is something that clearly needs to be fixed. But the final triple-edged sword of this is just that some people have terrible internet setups, and for the first time they're starting to see why they do. A lot of the posts I've seen online, especially on Reddit, have been people being like, yeah, look at this video from in-game, and you literally can see in the video all of the network icons warning them that they have a bad connection playing, whether it's them playing over Wi-Fi, which is a terrible idea for pretty much any first-person shooter, or they have an unstable connection, or they have an unstable ISP provider, or their ISP routes their data for really strange servers that cause lag. All of these are things that can affect your gameplay. And generally speaking, I think a game that has 60Hz server environments for most console gamers, it tends to be a little surprising when they realize that some of their general setups are not particularly good. For those of you who are interested in Battlefield RedSec, just like myself, they have in this blog post acknowledged that audio fixes are coming to the game, which is obviously fantastic. For those of you who have played, the audio is really not great in places. Solos has been confirmed as coming to this Battle Royale, which is exciting, but they have said that they want to see what they need to modify in order to make that happen. And they are keeping an eye on not only how long it takes to replate in the game, but also the overarching availability of tanks. They haven't committed to changes on either of these, they just say it's things that they're watching and things that they're exploring internally, which I think is good. I genuinely believe not having a knee-jerk reaction to some of the online conversations is healthy for RedSec, and seeing the initial intention from the design come across first is more important than random reactions from streamers online. Fundamentally, I still believe Battlefield 6 is a good game, but I also believe that in a lot of ways it is a fundamentally flawed game. And in many ways, I guess that's kind of been something that's made up most good Battlefield releases. If you look at Battlefield 4's release, if you look at Battlefield 3's release, you know, that conversation kind of rings true across all of those titles. But what I will say is that it's really refreshing to see in this blog post just a general, very clear understanding from the developers of what people are actually talking about, where the complaints are lying, and how people are expecting Battlefield 6 to improve, and seeing it come from them in their own writing addressing some of these conversations, like map design, is very promising. Historically, some Battlefield games, and quite frankly most game studios in the eyes of criticism, tend to just sort of go, well, we know better, or, you know, we disagree and we believe that XYZ is better than what you're saying, but it doesn't seem to be that that's the approach for Battlefield here, and I very much commend them for that. It seems like the approach here is, you know what, we've made a pretty good title, we know it could be a little bit better, here's the ways we're going to do that. And I genuinely think that's a pretty good approach. So folks, that's it for this video today. I hope you found this all interesting. Let me know your thoughts and feelings on the future of Battlefield 6 and RedSec. Feel free to drop a like, and I'll see you again in the next one.